Hi, everybody. My name is Sandy Koenig. I am the chair of the Harvard Political Union. And on behalf of the Harvard Political Union, the Harvard Democrats, and the Harvard Republicans Club, I'd like to welcome you all to this debate today. I'm going to give everyone debating today just a minute to introduce themselves. So I'll start off by turning it over to the Democrats to give a little Harvard introduction. For myself, I'm Sandy. I'm a junior. I live in Winthrop House, and I study history. To the Democrats.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Sandy. We're all excited to be here with you. My name is Menat Bahnasy. I'm a sophomore. I study economics, and I currently serve as the president of the Harvard College Democrats.
Hey, y'all. My name is Oswaldo. I am a sophomore at Mather House studying history with the secondary in Gov.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kate. I'm a sophomore. I'm treasurer of the Dems, and I am in Adams House studying history and literature with a secondary in government.
All right, now I'll turn it over to the Republicans to introduce themselves.
Hi, everybody. How's it going? My name is Wesley. I'm serving as the president of the Harvard Republican Club. I'm a junior. I study econ and energy and environmental sciences. I live in Adams House, and I'm on the track team. And also shout out to Sandy for setting this up. This is great, and thank you for the Dems for participating. I'm sure it's going to be fantastic. So glad to see everyone here.
Thanks, Wes.
Benny Paris. I am also a debater for the Republican Club. I live in Leverett House, study applied math with a secondary in Gov, and really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thanks, Benny. I would like to give you guys a little bit of information about the HPU. The Harvard Political Union is one of the Institute of Politics's 17 programs. We are the Center for Political Debate on campus. We host debates like this one that you're at right now, as well as a weekly debate among our members around political topics, and we host various guests throughout the year. If you're interested in learning more about the HPU, the IOP, please sign in at the sign up form that I just sent to the chat. We'd like to, see all the interest there, and I can pass a lot of that information on to the Democrats and the Republicans if you indicate that on the form. With that, I'd like to kick off the debate. We have agreed on 5 topics that we'll be covering today. Those are healthcare, climate change, social issues, economics, and foreign policy before we open it up to everyone for audience questions. We flipped a coin before the debate and found that the Republicans will be answering first. But we are the format will be 2 minutes in response to the question for each side, followed by 1 minute of rebuttal time to respond to the other arguments. For each question. We're going to ask one question for each topic in the interest of keeping this short and not keeping you here for hours and hours and hours. And we're going to start out with healthcare. The question to the Republicans first, and then to the Democrats: should the government guarantee healthcare to all Americans? And that's to the Republicans for 2 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you, Sandy. Well, just to start off, I want to recognize that healthcare is a life-giving industry, right? And as a nation, we've already decided that we are lucky and fortunate enough that we can help seniors and individuals who, because of certain set of circumstances, can't pay for modern healthcare treatments through programs like Medicare, Medicaid. But guaranteeing healthcare to all Americans would require some radical moves. And to guarantee something everything, then the government's going to have to raise taxes and take it over and essentially socialize the healthcare industry under a kind of Medicare for all plan. But if you just want to be serious about truly helping our friends and neighbors afford healthcare, we really don't believe this is the path. And just to give you a flavor of what the performance of socialized medicine could be, just look at this pandemic. Here are some facts that compare the privatized system in the United States to all those healthcare for all systems that guarantee it for people in Europe. First, we have more ventilators per capita than UK, Germany, Italy, France, etc. We lead the world in ICU beds, which has been determined life or death right now with COVID. And this privatized healthcare system is why we have less deaths per capita than all those large European countries. Some more things are non-COVID related. We have the highest US cancer survival rate. We produce the vast majority of new drugs in the world. One nation, us, produces all these drugs because we are committed to private innovation. The issues in the US with corona testing kits were because the US government literally told private clinics back in February that they weren't allowed to develop a test. They had it covered. And what had happened? They took a long time to develop tests that were, many were faulty, they didn't work. And once President Trump got the government, the FDA out of the way, we've been rapidly improving with 85% of tests being done in private labs. So under private healthcare, not only is innovation encouraged, but it's necessary. Should the same bureaucrats and systems that lost lives in Italy and prevented tests in the US be handed everything? Definitely not. We should preserve privatized healthcare.
Thank you, Wes. Let's turn it over to the Democrats for 2 minutes.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sandy. Thanks so much, Wes. In the wealthiest and most powerful nation in the world, nobody should have to choose between bringing a loved one to see a doctor and paying rent or buying groceries. We are the only developed and wealthy nation in the world that doesn't guarantee healthcare for all of our citizens. Roughly 28 million Americans don't have health insurance. That's almost 10% of Americans. 10% of Americans who are at risk of going broke or going bankrupt if they get sick. And that's after the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. And that Care Act also helped 20 million people gain affordable healthcare coverage and cut the uninsured rate by almost half. Basic security and healthcare shouldn't be a question. Without good health, we don't have anything. Without good health, we can't participate in the labor force and stimulate the economy and take care of our families. Without good health, we can't run for public office and serve the country. Without good health, we can't even join the military to serve and fight for this nation. So much so that various health concerns can keep you from making the choice to serve. Good health is what allows us to be. It's what makes healthcare right. Just like food, water, shelter, healthcare allows us to be functioning members of society. And now there's a lot of diversity among Democrats about the best way to ensure that healthcare remains a right and that it's consistently affordable and effective. Whether it be a public option through the government, whether it be a mix of public and private options, where there are private options and then the government gives the rest of the options to the people who can't afford those private options, that's still a question. But what's critical at this moment is to recognize that healthcare is a basic and fundamental right for all people, regardless of someone's ability to pay, and that our healthcare system shouldn't just cater to those who are able to pay for monthly premiums and those who can access it through their work, but it should cater to those who are most vulnerable and who are just seeking the life that they want to live to be healthy and allow their families to be healthy as well. I yield my time.
Thank you, Menat. We will turn it back over to the Republicans for 1 minute.
So to quickly respond to a couple of the points made, one of the problems with calling healthcare a right is that it kind of confounds the difference between what a right is and what just a good thing is. Everything that is good and that we like is not a right. Healthcare is obviously good, and we wish that more people would have better healthcare. That doesn't make it a right. Rights are fundamentally natural things, things that are intrinsic to being a human person. Now, we can debate whether or not that is the case, but I think that the view that healthcare is in and of itself this right is narrow-minded at best. But to kind of end off, why is it that the United States is this developed nation and we don't have this? The answer is that the European system could not exist in the form that it is now without the United States having its private system. Europe has essentially been free riding on American innovation and technology for 50 years. And if the United States switched over to a socialized medical system or a public option, we would have to find that innovation elsewhere. And that would have to come from China. In short, having this sort of public healthcare system would be top to the Chinese.
Thank you, Benny. Let's turn it over to the Democrats for 1 minute of response.
Yeah, thanks. So let's look at where we are today in this crisis. Nearly 1 million cases in the US, just the US alone, and nearly 54,000 people have died. And a lot of those people due to the fact that they couldn't access the healthcare that they needed through this crisis, that they were too worried to go to the doctor because they couldn't afford the bill that would arrive at their door in a couple of weeks. I believe that healthcare is absolutely a right. It's a fundamental right because, like I said, without health, we don't have anything. If we want to continue being an economic powerhouse in the world, and we want to continue creating those innovations that allow other countries to also use the innovations that we come up with, we need to make sure that there are people who are able to do that, who are able to give to the economy, who are able to work the jobs that we need. That without all of the health care that you'd be able to have and having that be a right, you can't do any of that. And just because other healthcare systems couldn't operate in the US, it doesn't mean that it's something that we can't try. It's something that we should be able to try and should be trying in the future, because right now with 28 million people not having health insurance, that's not fair to the people who just can't afford it. It's not an equal playing field for everyone to be able to access jobs, and everyone should be able to have healthcare as a right.
Thank you, Menat. All right. We are now going to move to a discussion on climate change. Many proposals have been floated. One popular proposal that is floated, particularly in liberal circles, is the Green New Deal. And so we are going to start, and we are going to switch this time to start with the Democrats. And the question will be, should the Green New Deal be a basis for our efforts to combat climate change? The Democrats, you have 2 minutes.
Yes, absolutely. The Green New Deal should be a basis for our efforts to combat climate change. Obviously, the Green New Deal is just a starting point, and we have to take much more drastic action if we're going to mitigate this threat. But looking at where we are right now, by 2030, we have to at least half our carbon emissions in order to achieve only a 1.5 Celsius warming. If we originally set the goal for 2 degrees Celsius, it turns out that wasn't going to be enough. A world that warms by that is going to double the number of people affected by water scarcity. There's going to be twice as many crops that perish. This is not just an issue of trying to save some wildlife. This is an issue of trying to save human beings. And if we're going to use the coronavirus as an example, I think this is a perfect example of what happens when we don't listen to scientists and when we don't respond exactly as they are telling us to, as the UN report did. I think we also need to look at how the Green New Deal invests in other communities. Climate change, while it affects all of us, does not affect all of us equally. Yes, yes, we will all be hit, but some people might be lamenting the loss of snow and unreasonably hot summers, while others might need clean air to breathe. The Green New Deal centers that inequality, recognizes it, and hopes to mitigate it.
30 seconds.
The Green New Deal also creates a blue-green alliance between labor and environmentalism. If we're going to try to pit environmentalists against labor advocates, that is not productive. That is done by the people at the top to try to keep us all fighting before looking at companies like Chevron, like ExxonMobil, that are actually exploiting our labor and creating a future that is not sustainable for us and our children, and that is why we need a Green New Deal.
Thank you, Kate. The Republicans, you have 2 minutes. Wes, I believe you're muted.
Restart. Okay. Thank you, Sandy, and thank you, Kate. So as the Democrats pointed out, right, the Green New Deal is an ideological document that calls for strict government interference to achieve emissions reductions. And they're right, it's just a starting point. They said it's a starting point needed for more action. It's actually a starting point for less action. It'll cause less emissions reductions than the Republican plans. I really sympathize with this issue. I study energy and environmental sciences. However, if you're going to be serious about going green in a radical way, you're going to have to do it in the most cost-efficient way possible to draw all the stakeholders to the table instead of driving them away with moralizing. And the way you're going to do that is through economics. Said you have to listen to the scientists. Yes, we have to listen to the scientists of the economy, because the problem of pollution is fundamentally economic. The key to reducing emissions in a radical manner is by guiding the billions of decisions made by consumers, from buying a more expensive hybrid car versus a cheaper normal car or a more efficient toaster. Regulators will never be able to capture all these decisions. Market-based solutions like the Republican carbon dividend plan aren't only simpler and more cost-effective, but they go farther than the Green New Deal ever could. And all the best research has proven this, that the Republican-led carbon dividend plan, which is a tax that then gives the money right back to Americans, will cut emissions by more than double what all Obama-era regulations would have done by 2025, and it would far exceed the target set in the Paris Climate Agreement by a factor of 2. And this was supported by the largest public statement of economists on any issue in history. Over 3,500 US economists signed a document supporting carbon dividends over the Green New Deal, including every living Nobel laureate economist and all living 15 former chairs of the Council of Economic Advisors, both Republican and Democrat. None of these people support the Green New Deal, and they are the scientists of this issue. The Green New Deal takes a noble end, pursuing emissions reduction, crafts it in an ideological farce that actually gets us farther away from solving the issue. So I just really want to see this solved.
Thank you, Wes. Democrats, you have 1 minute to respond.
Yes, I think if we're trying to talk about saving the economy and making sure that we create something that's economically sustainable for all of us, we can also look at the Green New Deal in the way that it has a federal jobs guarantee and a way to create jobs that will actually that will be sustainable for the future. And the Republican plan also takes out EPA regulations so people who pay the taxes can still emit carbon. If we're talking about trying to control consumer decisions, that's all well and good until the much cheaper option is for people to buy things that contribute to carbon emissions. That, like I said before, this is not an issue that affects all of us equally. That we need to look at the inequalities that environmental plans create and climate change creates to be able to effectively mitigate this issue. So in order to do that, we need both. We need environmentalism, we need jobs, and we need justice in all of this. And that's what you're not going to get with the Republican plan.
Thank you, Kate. Republicans, you'll have 1 more minute.
Yeah, so I think this question of justice, gets right down to the heart of the Green New Deal, which is that it's not actually a serious environmental plan. It's a crackpot plan invented by people who are trying to change the way that America fundamentally is, and they've just admitted this. Look, at some point, this idea that, well, you'll still be able to pollute, the Republican plan doesn't control decisions. That's what progressivism is. That's what the Democrats want. They want to control your decisions. EPA regulations are a great example. U.S. manufacturing does not cause even a tiny scintilla of the emissions compared to consumer decisions like cars. All right, cars are causing global warming. For example, the steel mills that are shut down in Pennsylvania, auto plants. Getting those back up and running would be a great win for labor. It would be a great win for the American worker. Something that has been dying out recently. The Green New Deal is against the American worker. It's for an elite and, kind of lazy, decadent American worker. That's not what we want.
Thank you, Benny. We are going to move now to social issues. And one particular topic, especially concerning the current administration, is the question of immigration. And on this particular topic, we are going to ask, should legal immigration be expanded or restricted? And how do you propose to do that? Republicans, you'll have the first 2 minutes to respond.
Awesome. So I think it's important to note that immigration isn't just about charts and graphs and talking about statistics, but immigration is about our families, communities, and culture, right? And the issue is these were exacerbated by our last president. Instead of effecting change, the Obama administration turned a blind eye to growing problems, federal law, and the will of the American people. By giving amnesty and unconstitutionally and nullifying federal law, we've now been left with a mess of very complicated situations that have occurred with people like the Dreamers. The Obama administration made more complex and difficult to resolve all these issues. Further action needs to be taken as the status quo of sanctuary cities and unenforced laws cannot continue. But in terms of this legal immigration, I think some of the best research comes out of Harvard University. Professor Borjas, who's an immigrant from Cuba, and he's done a lot of work in this issue. What he shows is in general, right, legal immigration is good for the U.S. It benefits the immigrants themselves and the economy as a whole, and it benefits us, people who participate in the economy. But I think it's important to understand that it doesn't benefit everybody in the U.S. And you want to talk about justice, it hits the lowest income groups the most because they compete in the labor market with these people. And Professor Borjas, you can walk down and talk to him, but he's dedicated his life to this issue. So I think we really need to take that into consideration. And obviously, I think the legal immigration system should be expanded to make it efficient and fair and to reduce the amount of illegal immigration, but it shouldn't be expanded to the point where we're hurting Americans, right? The point of America is for Americans. The point of your boat is to help you float, not people in other boats float. And it would be unfair to the immigrants currently in the United States who hold American citizenship to not consider the effects of further immigration on them. And with that, right, we can't have sanctuary cities defying federal law and preventing real law enforcement from happening. We need larger immigration systems and expanded networks that make it fair and that take away from illegal immigration, but not so much that it hurts the immigrants and natives already in the United States.
Thank you, Wes. Democrats, you have 2 minutes.
So when we talk about immigration, we need to talk about what the immigration system looks like. And as an immigrant myself, I understand what this immigration system looks like. And we need to deal with the fact that our immigration system is fundamentally based on racist laws from the 20th and 19th century. That includes the Chinese Exclusion Act, that includes the 1924 immigration law that basically said that Europeans should have a better path into the United States than people from Asian countries or from Latin American countries or from African countries. We need to realize that this immigration system is fundamentally flawed and racist. So the fact is that we need to expand the immigration system, but not only that, we need to change the way it's done. So right now, currently, the immigration system works whereupon somebody from Germany has a better chance of coming into the country than somebody from Mexico, because both of these countries have the same amount of visas that they can obtain, no matter the population. It does not matter that Mexico is geographically closer, that it is linked to the United States through the economy or through legacies of imperialism. It does not matter. Both countries have the same amount of visas. So to create an actual just immigration system, we need to make sure that countries that are linked to the United States economically or geographically can have more visas. Furthermore, we need to increase the amount of asylum applications that we accept into the country, because people coming here and claiming asylum means that they're coming here as refugees, saying that if they go back to the places where they come, their lives are at risk because of things like climate change, because of things like domestic violence or gang violence. And we need to accept these people into this country, because to turn them away means to deny them basic human rights, means to deny them life. And I think we need to offer a path towards citizenship to all the undocumented people in this country, because one, they pay taxes to our country. Two, they are just trying to live a fair and equitable life in the United States, and they are here. Might as well include them in the rights and privileges that we all have.
Thank you, Oswaldo. All right, with that, the Republicans have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, so I think the fundamental problem with this argument that the United States immigration system is racist is that the United States immigration system is neutral to where you are from based on country. So Germany and Mexico get the same amount. It would be playing favorites to say that for whatever reason somebody else gets a different amount. Now look, the quota system obviously needs some fine tuning. There have been many proposals, in fact, to sort of work to figure out exactly what we're going to do with the unprecedented number of new immigrants that came to the United States between the 1960s and today. And look, I am grateful in many respects for that. My mother would not have been able to come to this country had it not been for that. She was from one of the poorest countries on the planet. The question of immigration is not about charity, though. The asylum question, for example, has been completely overtaken. There are groups down in poor South American, Latin American, Central American countries who are telling people how they can fake their way into asylum, how they can say the right things to make sure that they can apply and get into asylum. This is how we had the caravan. We had a literal group of people just deciding to go in a giant train and come into the country. That's not a problem. Then you, I think, have a problem with understanding what national security is and what having a nation is.
Thank you, Benny. Democrats, you have 1 minute to respond.
I think we can argue about facts all we want, but when it comes down to this is an ethical question. When we talk about amnesty not being a good thing, when we talk about how sanctuary cities shouldn't exist, when we talk about how people from Central America fleeing from gang violence, from environmental impacts, from domestic abuse are faking their way into the United States, what we're saying is that these people don't deserve basic human rights. What we're saying is that these people deserve to go back to their countries to die from one of the many things that I have mentioned before.
Thank you, Oswaldo. We are going to move into a discussion of the economy. Currently, the most pressing issue on the economy is obviously the coronavirus crisis that we're all facing right now. In keeping with that, I am going to ask, should the corona stimulus package be paying people not to work, as it is alleged sometimes? Democrats, you'll have the first 2 minutes for this question.
Absolutely. I think when we ask, are we paying people not to work, we're asking the wrong question. What we should be asking is, first of all, should people have to go back to work where they can potentially endanger themselves, potentially endanger their families, their loved ones, and the people whom they interact with, so that they can get the money that they, of course, need to survive? Instead, what we should be saying is that we as a country need to make sure that people can get the money that they need to survive, instead of being allowed to starve to death or not have the adequate money to go to the doctor or have the adequate money to put food on their tables. Right now, 25 million Americans are unemployed. And we need to, instead of talking about whether we are giving out too much money to them, we need to be talking about how to increase the benefits that we currently have, because a lot of the states that are currently being used as to help these people have systems that are just inadequate. Actually, last week, my parents were unfortunately unemployed from their jobs. And the state of Iowa said that we as a family would be getting $300 a week to survive. You know, what kind of fuckery is that? That is not a country in which we should be living in, where a family of 5 would be living on $300 a week. We need to expand the amount of benefits that people get. We need to strengthen Medicaid. We need to strengthen Medicare and Social Security. We need to grant access to immigrants so that they can actually get these benefits. And we need to realize that $1,200 just isn't enough for an American family to live off of for 10 weeks, like the current Secretary of the Treasury says. These benefits are really important for Americans to be living off of, and we need to make sure that we are increasing them as much as possible.
Thank you, Oswaldo. Republicans, you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, and so I'll just respond to this without expletives, and I'll start by doing that and say I definitely think I don't think there's too much disagreement here. I definitely don't think we're paying people to work or not to work. I don't think that we want people allowed to be starved to death. I think the President Trump and the Republicans pushed through the stimulus package that sent money to Americans despite a lot of Nancy Pelosi's best efforts to stall it. But I think where we can find something to actually debate about is, and either we do this mainly through increasing benefits or cutting taxes. And the answer is cutting taxes. Because the goal is we want people to have money now. We don't want to have people to have money in 3 to 5 months. And by just increasing benefits, that's just government programs. We've already seen with these CARES checks. The government's literally the simplest program, just giving people money, can take up to 3 months for the government to hand you your check. I haven't gotten my check yet. And if we want people to have more money, the best thing is to just not take it from them. Let them have it. Let's not take more money from the system. Cut payroll taxes, cut self-employment taxes, allow people to do jobs, and allow them to keep their hard-earned money without having it be transferred through the hands of government. And ideally, this tax cut would be designed to allow the lowest levels of income to keep as much of their wages as possible, including frontline emergency workers, healthcare workers, food supply workers, etc. Now, these taxes are not, a complete solution. Tax cuts aren't a complete solution in and of themselves, but they're definitely a large portion. It should be the focus of any kind of stimulus effort. Again, I really don't think there's too much disagreement here in the sense that I don't think we're paying people not to work. This is a pandemic. This is a unique time that hasn't happened in a long time. We want to get Americans back to work. And the best way to do that is to cut taxes on going to work. So payroll taxes, income taxes, cut sales taxes, things like that. So I'll see the rest of my time.
Thank you, Wes. Democrats, you'll have 1 minute to respond.
Yeah, so I think I'm glad that there's no disagreement. When it comes to cutting taxes as the answer, we need to realize that cutting the payroll tax would benefit those Americans that are earning the most, because the people that get the most amount of money taken from their paychecks are the people that earn the most amount of money. Also, the way that payroll taxes work is that if you are getting a paycheck, those taxes will not be taken from your paycheck. But that does not include the 25 million Americans that are currently unemployed that also deserve to have a lot of these benefits given to them. So for these 25 million people, benefits need to be increased, and that includes making sure that these state-run agencies are actually giving people what they need to survive.
Republicans?
Yeah, so to clarify, the payroll tax is not actually like income tax, most laden on the richest. In fact, it is essentially working class tax. It runs out, it stops, it's capped. So there's a level of income, a relatively wealthy one, at which you stop paying more payroll tax because you're stop receiving Social Security and Medicare benefits, Medicare, Medicaid benefits over a certain level. Look, the end of the story here is about whether or not we'd like to make Americans' lives easier or more complicated, right? Whether or not we're going to improve their lives and lessen the effects of this pandemic through means that are easy to manipulate or through creating new modes and orders. And as a conservative and as just a person who understands this is not a time to be inventing new things, to be inventing new ways to solve economic issues, I'm going to come down on the side of using things that we understand. At the same time, obviously, we need to make sure that industries are not being affected in global ways, right? Global supply chains could very well go back to China before America reopens if we botch this. We need to make sure that the people who should be staying home are staying home, and those who are going to work are protected so that America is not cut out of the global economy.
Thank you, Benny. At this point, we're reaching close to the end, and I think we are going to open it up, in fact, to audience questions. If you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand with the blue hand raise function, and we will take a few questions. The format for questions will be 1 minute and 30 seconds of response by each side. Unfortunately, the foreign policy question, I believe our debater, Menat, was kicked out of the chat somehow. She said she accidentally lost connection. And since she was the one who was planning to answer the foreign policy question, I think we will go to audience questions, especially because this way we'll have time for perhaps 3 or 4 audience questions before we go to the info sessions. If you'd like to ask a foreign policy question, feel free to. With that, I'm going to go to Justin Lopez.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes.
I wanted to thank everyone for the debate today. I think it went really well. I just had a quick question on healthcare. So if healthcare is a human right, why is it the only right that government should subsidize? For example, why don't we subsidize the Second Amendment right, like provide a firearm to every American? Or why don't we subsidize free speech, like provide a platform for every American to speak on? I would just like a quick explanation on that. Thanks.
And we'll go to the Democrats first for the answer to this question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the fact that this right is one of the few rights where it needs to be subsidized by the government is the answer to this question. You know, like the government has to pay for healthcare, or else these hospitals, the healthcare professionals that we are so grateful for, will not get the pay that they need. So I think what really lies at the heart of this question is whether or not we really think that Americans deserve to be treated at any healthcare facility, no matter whether they have healthcare or not. So I think the answer is the government just has to pay for the healthcare, no matter what the right is, you know?
Thank you, Oswaldo. Republicans, if you'd like to respond.
Definitely. To answer your question, Justin, healthcare is definitely not right. Right. Right is something that is natural to you, as Benny talked about. Something that comes with you, that is innate to you being a human being, an American citizen. You, as just being born, don't have the right to someone going to medical school for years and to come to a clinic to serve you. Right. Just like you might have a right to free speech, but you don't have a right to someone making a newspaper and then publishing your article. No, because that's requiring something else. No right can require somebody else to do something for you. And secondly, I think the Democrats said that someone has to pay. The government is going to have to pay, otherwise no one's going to pay these doctors. Well, the U.S. doctors are paid more than Europe. We have the most profitable healthcare industry. We have more profitable healthcare with people who are paid more than over in Europe, where they're paid less and the government's paying there. Talk about, people need healthcare, otherwise they're going to die. Well, there's been more deaths in Europe under government healthcare than there has been in the US. By not having it a right, we're actually lowering costs, increasing innovation. All those new medicines, as I said, we have the highest cancer survival rate. All those new medicines that protect diabetes, cancer, chemo, that all comes out of the US. Why? Because we haven't bought into this false ideology that healthcare is a right, which actually in the end is just going to kill more people, have doctors paid less, reduce innovation, and confuse people on what's the fundamental nature of what's a right and what's not.
Thank you, Wes. Jimmy, I see you have your hand up.
My question is to Oswaldo Ambrosio, actually. I'm very curious to know if you think immigration is a human right, and if you think U.S. citizenship is some kind of a God-given right that we all have to have.
Thank you, Jimmy. All right, given that the question was toward the Democrats, I'll give the Democrats the first minute and 30 seconds to respond.
Yes, so I think what you're trying to ask is whether people deserve to have American citizenship in general. So what I will ask in response is, why should somebody born 2 minutes south of the border on the Mexican side not have any of the same rights as somebody born 2 minutes above the Mexican-American border on the Texas side? Why is somebody that was born in Mexico who travels to the United States in an unauthorized fashion and living their entire lives in the United States, paying taxes, playing by the rules? Why should their rights not be on par with most Americans? This is a question of how we view our morals as a country, and whether we view immigrants as people who deserve to have rights. And clearly, currently, the Republican Party, unfortunately, does not agree. That doesn't necessarily mean that the Harvard Republican Club is the same as the Republican Party in general. I don't know their stance on immigration, but as we are seeing the Republicans on the national stage right now, we see that the question of whether immigrants should be treated as humans is a profound no, which has been shown through multiple things, including the Muslim ban, including locking children up in cages. And I think we need to do better as a country. So to answer your question, I think we need to stop viewing American citizenship as something that other people don't deserve just because they were born somewhere different.
Thank you, Oswaldo. Republicans, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Yeah, actually, Oswaldo gives the perfect argument against birthright citizenship, actually, which is exactly what the president had said. Why does it make sense that somebody born 2 minutes one side or the third or the other, gets American citizenship? Ultimately, citizenship is not something that can merely be viewed transactionally. And it's not something that we can give to everyone. If we just said, hey, if you like the Constitution and you like freedom and rock and roll, and you want to live and work in a peaceful country, that's literally everybody who breathes. I mean, there's a very, very small subset of people who don't like the things that America stands for. It's not a very hard country to assimilate into. This is not France, where you need to learn all of the different social mores of their civilization. We can't simply offer it to everyone. I mean, America would have 2 billion people in it, okay, if we took Oswaldo's logic and just extended it to everyone. The fact that somebody gets, kind of a free pass because they were able to walk here. For example, look at immigrants from sub-Saharan Africa, right? They have no luxury of being able to come to the United States illegally in the same way that many people are able to do across the southern border. It's simply the case that in order for it to be fair, we need to have a border that can be closed, that people cannot cross willy-nilly. And we need to have a system that actually evaluates why someone should be able to come into America. It's a question as a nation. It's not a question merely of, are people good people? There are good people everywhere, and God bless them, but they cannot all simply become American citizens simply because American citizenship is good.
Thank you, Benny. We're going to take one more question before we break for the info sessions. I encourage someone to ask a question about foreign policy, given that it was not brought up, but it is obviously not required. Luis, the floor is yours.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't gonna ask a foreign policy question, but I can. So here, let me craft it real quick. All right, so with the Chinese Communist Party officially, starting their Belt and Road Initiative, starting to invest in so many foreign countries, Sri Lanka, Djibouti, finally building their first foreign base in Djibouti, seizing a port in Sri Lanka that we suspect has military bases. What do you think about the current administration's more isolationist stance, not really wanting to cut back on foreign aid, being hostile with NATO and other foreign nations, suggesting that Japan should start, or Japan and Korea should start taking care of themselves, and threatening to withdraw troops and even threatening to withdraw from NATO?
Thank you, Luis. I will give the Republicans the first minute and 30 seconds to respond to this because the Democrats have the previous two questions.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Luis, for this question. It's actually one really near and dear to me. So my family lives on a U.S. military base overseas, and I've lived, abroad in U.S. military bases that are set up for this purpose. China's obviously expanding, and they have a horrible track record of human rights. And they're trying to expand and take advantage of countries through the Belt and Road Initiative. They're investing in Africa and indebting poor African countries in order to claim their mineral rights. So we have to combat that. Now, I wouldn't though characterize the president's stance as isolationist. I would characterize it as not playing ball with an authoritarian regime who is going to do all these things, right? We need to talk to our NATO allies and say, hey, you have to contribute what you've said you're going to contribute to national defense as a percentage of your GDP, as you said. Because right now we're fitting the bill for national security and combating threats like China and Russia, because we have bases all over the world, and we're the only one that does that. These countries have our bases come there and free write-off for national security. So I don't think the goal is isolationism that the president's going for, but it's to kind of tell the rest of the world, hey, wake up. Where the United States can't stand alone against these powers, we could, but it would bankrupt us. So we're just trying to get them to pay their fair share, and I'll toss it to Benny real quick.
Yeah. I mean, if you can just ask yourself the simple question of who do you trust at the end of the day to back American interests over Chinese interests? President Trump or Joe Biden? I think the answer is obvious, that Joe Biden is not somebody who's done well at standing up to China. He and a lot of European nations have been essentially okay to say our business is managing decline. They're managing the decline of the Western world, and we're going to allow them to, have a good century and have global domination for a little while. That is not the you're going to go out.
Thank you, Benny. Democrats, I will give you a minute and 30 seconds to respond.
Yeah, I am just a little confused as to why people are denying that this is isolationist. I think the very definition of isolationism is saying that you're not going to play ball with countries and saying you're not going to play ball with authoritarian regimes. Which authoritarian regimes are you referring to right now? Because last I checked, we seemed pretty friendly with Russia. So I don't know if that necessarily counts as not playing ball or not playing by certain rules. I also think that that we do have military bases all over the country, and we do need to be sure to protect our national security interests. But we also need to be sure to protect human rights at the same time. That if we are, as the Republicans love saying, the greatest country in the entire world, we should really be trying to spread those values and make sure that when the coronavirus spreads around the world, it doesn't cause a global hunger crisis, it doesn't cause a global it doesn't cause a global health crisis. And to respond to the people who are being very active in the chat about those were just friendly sanctions against Russia, sure, sure we had those sanctions there, but if you look at the way that our president has been interacting with Russia, especially as the way that they have been interacting with people who are our allies, I think we will see a very big disparity. And I don't know how much time I have, but Oswaldo, if you'd like to say anything else.
Yeah, I think in general, we are stronger when we stand with our allies, and when we use methods that don't include warfare or anything like that. Yeah, just in general, if we stand with our allies like we have been doing in the past, I think that would benefit us more. Yeah, period.
Thank you, Oswaldo. With that, I'm going to bring the debate to a close. I'd like to thank all of you so much for coming and joining us today. I'd like to thank the Harvard College Democrats. I'd also like to thank the Harvard Republican Club. The debate will be followed by info sessions with the information that I see just getting posted in the chat. But with that, I'd like to thank you all again. Congratulations on being accepted. I hope we see you all in the fall. I hope we have a semester in the fall, but if not then whenever we do reconvene. And I hope you all have a great rest of your weekend and enjoy the info sessions. Thanks so much, everyone.